Hi everyone, I'm going to show you my round 4 game from the Pula Open. I faced candidate master Debevec. We have played before in the Serbia Open 2021. We drew the game. It was the same opening, but a bit more theoretical than in this game. This is probably the game I'm not gonna say anything else. So my opponent started with knight f3. I played d5 after c4, c6. He played d4 and I played knight f6. We are now in normal Slav, and after e3 this is the quiet Slav, and black gets to develop the bishop to f5 without any consequences except for eventually giving up the bishop on g6, but that's fine. I've played this numerous times and it's just a normal opening. My opponent played knight c3, which is the main move, e6, and now the main line goes knight h4, either bishop e4 or bishop g6. In our previous game, our game had gone knight h4 and bishop e4. But in this game my opponent played queen b3, and I know this line, it's a normal line. After queen b6, black should play c5, queen c7, knight h4, bishop g6, knight takes, pawn takes, followed by g3, and white's plan is to play for e4 or b4, b5, and it should be roughly equal. But here my opponent surprised me with bishop e2. I don't know this move. Okay, so now I can play h6 and my bishop is safe. My opponent castled, I played bishop e7. Of course I don't want to play bishop d6 because then c5 forces me to trade queens unfavorably. Knight e5, knight bd7, and f4. Now this is a very typical position in which white has overextended with the f-pawn and black is better. And I wasn't sure about this exact position, but I know that black is at least equal here. And I know this type of position, I know that f4 is a weakness, because eventually black is going to play f6, undermine the center, and then also c5, either or. Okay, however, I blundered here, and I actually made a very similar mistake in the Zagreb, finals of the Croatian Cup last year, where I allowed g4 to be played when it was favorable for my opponent. And I have no excuse for, I mean, it's not the same mistake, but it's very similar. I have no excuse for allowing it here. I castled, and my opponent could have gotten an almost winning position with g4. The point behind g4 is that it's a tempo on two of my pieces and my knight on d7 is undefended. And when he saw me castle, he made a face, sort of, maybe I was imagining things, but when I saw his face I realized that I had blundered. And then I put a poker face on. I wanted to look really confident, and I also started to calculate what actually happens after g4. After g4 my conclusion was that white is winning. The engine says plus 0.7, so not really winning, but I have to give up a piece. So g4, bishop h7, okay, only move pretty much, and g5. And now when I take, if my knight moves, my opponent takes on d7, wins the knight and an exchange, so I have to take on e5. And after gf6, bishop f6, d5, bishop e5, my opponent is up a piece for 3 pawns and I'm busted. Now, of course, I would have played on, and, everyone can mess up, but, sorry, 2 pawns, a piece up for 2 pawns. And I have a very good bishop pair, my opponent's king is slightly weak, and so on, but this would have been losing. Fortunately for me, instead of that, my opponent played c5, which is a very bad move. Now let me explain why c5 is bad. Well, I now have f6 and b6. This center is going to completely collapse. My queen goes to c7, so my knight's defended, g4 doesn't work. This bishop is bad, and I have the e4 square. So when my opponent played bishop d2, I was pretty confident that I had a winning position, because my opponent isn't in time to play b4. So if the queen was on d1, when I play b6, white could respond with b4, maintaining the center, and then a5 wouldn't work because the rook on a1 is defended. So I couldn't undermine the center completely. With the queen on b3, I can just go b6, and I mean, on a very high level, this is winning because the center is gone and I'm going to create multiple weaknesses. Of course, I'm also threatening to win a pawn, so my opponent has to take. Okay, cb, ab, and now I'm just going to play c5. That's it. And white wishes they didn't play f4. Okay, my opponent played a4. Okay, I didn't really understand the move, but perhaps after c5 the idea was knight b5. So I first played knight e4. I didn't want to allow knight b5. Also, this prepares f6. Also, if I take on e5, it's not a tempo on my knight. And also I'm attacking the bishop, so my opponent should respond. Knight e4, bishop e4. Now there's no knight b5. However, my opponent is still not in time to prevent c5. He played rook ac1, but that undefends the a4 pawn. So now white wishes the pawn was back on a2, I think, and I go c5. And if you take on c5, your knight on e5 is loose. I can recapture with the b pawn. I also have rook fb8 coming, and you have to play queen d1, and I win the b pawn. You cannot defend b2 and a4 if you take, so you shouldn't take. My opponent played bishop b5. I took on e5, fe5, and now a simple undermining of the other side of the pawn chain, f6. And in this position, I was sure black was winning, and I'm absolutely correct, black is winning. White simply must give up a pawn. Let me turn on the engine. The engine says the best move is rook f4. Okay, and against rook f4 I shouldn't take. I can take on e5, but then black sacrifices the exchange on e4, so that's supposed to be a bit more than -1. However, after f6 my opponent took, and now I would like you to pause the video and find a win for black to play and win. Literally. I did not find it. Okay, so when I played f6, I had, calculated everything already. I had calculated rook f6, and if my opponent doesn't take, then I go rook f8. Sure, great position. If my opponent takes, I go bishop f6, and the pawn is hanging, so how does my opponent defend d4? He could go bishop d3, queen d3, but then the a4 pawn hangs. So before playing f6, I had calculated that I can pretty much win the a4 pawn by force, unless my opponent does something extraordinary and somehow defends everything. The winning move, however, is very simple, bishop d6. There is no way to defend everything. g3 loses to mate, of course. h3 loses to a very simple bishop h2, king h1, and queen g3. And again, there is no way to defend. What else? If you take on g7, for example, it's busted, bishop h2, king h1, queen g7, mate hanging, rook hanging, if rook f2, there is no way to defend. I don't think there's anything else to show. If king h1, then I can simply go c4, trapping this bishop, and the same threats are coming. I could also take on h2. So after ef6, bishop d6 is game over. So we're even now. He didn't find g4, I didn't play bishop d6. What can you do? In any case, I played rook f6, my opponent took, I took back with the bishop, and I got exactly what I wanted. I mean, how are you supposed to defend this? If you play bishop c3, I can take on d4 anyway, because the rook on c1 is hanging. Bishop c3, cd4. If ed4, then bishop d4, check. And if bishop d4, queen c1. And if bishop d4 straight away, then queen c1. So there's no way to defend the pawn, unless you can bring your queen to d3. So my opponent played exactly what I'd expected. Bishop d3. But this loses the a pawn. So takes, takes, rook takes. And of course, I had to calculate queen b5 before playing f6, but I couldn't visualize everything. My only conclusion was that on queen b5 I can go rook a8, and I'm not hanging queen e8 check, and dc5 doesn't work because rook c5 hangs mate. So let me show you. He did play queen b5. I played rook a8, he did play dc5, bc5, and now if you play rook c5, in my mind that was mate. It's not mate, it's -5. White can defend mate. I couldn't see a defense, so if rook c5, of course rook a1, and bishop c1 or rook c1 lose a piece. And if you go king f2, then queen takes h2, and there is no way to defend properly. You have a couple of checks, but the queen covers c7, so that's all there is. So here, check, g6, rook c7 unplayable, and of course bishop h4 is coming. I had assumed this was mate, but it's not mate. White can defend, but it's, you know, -1,000,000. So my opponent took with the queen. If he doesn't take with the queen, I'll just defend my pawn. I'll play c4. So he took with the queen, but this loses the b2 pawn. And after takes, rook takes, bishop b2. My opponent now played bishop c3. And I don't know if you saw my round 2 game against Nenad Doric. He, again, is a wonderful person and a great player, and he defeated me in a very technical endgame with the bishops of the same color. And I had that game in my mind here. So basically I can choose between the rook endgame and the bishop endgame. They are both winning in my mind. Why? Because my passed pawn is on d5. The pawns are split 2 files. I thought that was winning. If the pawn is on c5, b5 or a5, a bishop endgame is definitely winning. 2 files, now I'm not sure, because I know. The rook endgame is definitely winning, and let me show you why. After bishop takes, rook takes, black goes rook a2, and white can resign. There really is nothing to do. e4 is the only kind of source of counterplay. If rook c7, then rook e2 just loses the e3 pawn. So you cannot approach with the king. You cannot keep defending your pawn. If you don't do anything, I'll just go king f7 and march up the board and win the pawn. So let's say e4. Now if I take, it's a draw, but I go d4. And after rook d3, I go e5, and that's the end of the game. Protected passed pawn, active rook, very bad king on g1. That's it. There is no more analysis. If on rook a2 white plays something like h3, then of course king f7, and once again you're not in time. So I can choose between a bishop endgame and the rook endgame. After about 10 minutes, I visualized both endgames, and in my mind they were both game over. I was wrong. I played rook a1 check going into the bishop endgame. Of course king f2, rook c1. And after bishop d4 or bishop b4, we now get a bishop endgame, where my king reaches e5. Okay, now they are forced to take. This is the position I got to without h3, h5. That's unnecessary, but you know, with the pawns on h2 and h7, it would have been the same thing, where white has to take on d5 and I take back. And this position is a draw, which I didn't think it was a draw. I would have gone for a rook endgame. Now, explaining why I saw that the rook endgame was a clean win and still going for this, I cannot do that. I just thought both were winning, but this one was risk-free. This one I can never lose, which is a stupid way to think about positions, because how could you lose that rook endgame with a protected passed pawn on d4? You couldn't. I mean, you could lose a rook, but this one, there's no way I lose. There's just, I don't know, I would have to fall asleep. But my opponent plays the losing move here. And of course, from white's perspective, white is, you know, struggling for a draw, wants to exchange pawns. And the reason I played h5 was to prevent g4, because I thought if we traded pawns, it's going to be easier to win, which is true. g4 is the losing move. Now after a4, king g4, I played bishop c1, preventing the king from reaching from reaching g5, and the only thing I was afraid of was h4. And when my opponent didn't play h4, I was ecstatic. After the game, I told him, well, why didn't you play h4? And he showed me a line where black is winning. It doesn't work, but I think I would have won. I think he would have lost, because neither of us are good enough to understand all the nuances here. But basically, after h4, the idea behind h4 is to play h5. And now if I go g5, then I can lose. So I take on h5, king h5, and king somewhere, or bishop somewhere, let's say. And now the idea is to block out the bishop from defending. And when we were going through this line very quickly on the board, we found a win for black, which doesn't exist. I don't know the exact line. I don't know how the engine might have refuted that, but basically white can keep the blockade. For example, bishop a5, d4, king g4, let's say bishop f2, cutting the king off. If you go to h3, then it is losing. So let's say king g5, d3, bishop b4, king f3. And after king f5, they are just in time. Let's say I try to cut off the king again, bishop d2, here, bishop a5. And now my goal has to be to play bishop c3. If I manage to play, if my king was on c2 here, I would be winning. Unfortunately, I don't have a way to do that, because when I do that, the king comes to e4 and it's a draw. However, after bishop c1, thinking that h4 was the losing move, my opponent played king f3, and I couldn't believe it, because this is very much losing. There's no debate. This is like -10. And the point is, I can simply prevent h4 now, and I can play king f5. And there is no way for my opponent's king to approach unless it goes to e2. So my opponent played bishop d4, I played bishop g5, and now my idea is, of course, bishop f6, lifting the blockade, bishop f2, bishop f6, bishop g3, bishop e5. Any bishop trade, of course, leads to a losing king and pawn endgame for white, bishop f2, d4. Okay, and if the king ever goes to e2, I go king e4. So d3, this is a trick I found. King e3 loses very simply. On king e3 I can go bishop d4, check, and I just win the bishop. Or if you take the bishop, I queen. And when I played d3, my opponent hovered his hand above the king and then stopped, and I was shocked that he even went for the king, and our eyes met. You know, almost king e3. But then he ended up playing bishop e3, which is still losing, but king e3 would have lost straight away. Bishop c3, threatening d2, so bishop h6. Bishop d4, cutting the king off. Bishop f4, bishop c3, a bit of repetition, bishop h6. And now I blundered. I played the g5, the move that draws immediately. I didn't see that it's a draw, but it is a draw. There are two ways to win, bishop e5 or bishop d4. Bishop e5 is the cleanest win. This I did not see. If king e3, which white would like to play, then bishop f4 wins. And of course on king d3 I take the bishop, on king takes bishop, I queen. So that's the end of the game. And on bishop d4, let's say bishop c1, I just go around and around and around. I come here and I queen. So for example, king e5, bishop d2, king d5, I don't know. Well, the white king would have to do this in order to approach, and that's a bit too slow. So let's say here, 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 here. And I don't know. If king e1, I can just go king c2, and that's it. My next move is going to be bishop c3. And I'm winning. This I did see, but I thought g5 was cleaner, which is insane. So I played g5. And the reason this is a draw is because I now have to take care of my pawn constantly. Bishop d2. I thought if I play bishop f4, it's going to be the same thing, but it's not. Because after d2, king e2, I'm never approaching the h3 pawn, and I'm never making any progress on d1, because my opponent's king can just play king d1, king e2, and my opponent's bishop can remain on f2, preventing me from playing king h4. So my opponent prepares to play bishop f2. We shuffled our pieces around, and in this position we agreed to a draw because there is nothing to do. So first my opponent had a win with g4, or almost a win. Then I had a clear win with bishop d6. Then I could have chosen a winning rook endgame, but I didn't. Then I chose a drawn bishop endgame, but I had a winning position and I messed up. So by no means a clean game, a very painful game. What can I say? I have to work. I have a lot of work to do. I need confidence in my ability to convert positions. When I see that something's winning, and I think that something else is winning, I had about half an hour on the clock. I needed to take more time. Both endgames are easy to play. I could have blitzed both of them out. They aren't hard to play. I could have invested 20 more minutes to make sure. And this game is a great lesson to me. To be more patient in winning positions. Converting winning positions is about being able to calm yourself down and, not make wrong decisions. I don't mean blunders, but actual decisions when planning ahead. Thank you for watching. This was the round 4 game. I'm going to show you the next round game tomorrow. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.